Greetings from East Jerusalem. My name is Sarah Muscroft. I'm the head of the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs here in the occupied Palestinian territory. Today, the humanitarian community and the State of Palestine publicly launch the Humanitarian Response Plan for 2022. This is the second of our launch events this year. Last week, together with His Excellency Dr. Ahmed Mejdalani, the Minister of Social Development, representing the State of Palestine, the humanitarian coordinator, Ms. Lynn Hastings, convened a soft launch with key stakeholders and partners. Today, we are publicly launching the Humanitarian Response Plan 2022 for the occupied Palestinian territory through a live stream event. All over the world, social media brings together people who may not otherwise be able to meet. This is particularly important here in Palestine because people live in areas that are either physically separated from one another, like Gaza and the West Bank, or separated by a wall or other obstacles, like East Jerusalem and the rest of the territory. Our choice to publicly launch the Humanitarian Response Plan on social media also reflects our strong commitment to engage with the Palestinian people we are here to serve. Now, over the coming hour, we will talk to partners in East Jerusalem and other parts of the West Bank, in the Gaza Strip and abroad. And we encourage you to submit comments and questions as you watch this. Many of today's speakers, including myself, stand ready to respond on social media while the video is playing. And I'm sure you'd agree with me that every person should be able to live with dignity. Everyone should be able to access basic essential services, clean water, nutritious food. All of us should have the opportunity to study. We should all have the opportunity to get medical treatment when we need to. And all of us should feel safe in our homes and have our fundamental human rights respected. This is precisely what the Humanitarian Response Plan we launched today is about: a life with dignity for Palestinians. Last week, it was a great honour to be joined by His Excellency Dr. Ahmed Mejdalani, the Minister of Social Development, in our soft launch, during which he stated, "We are very keen as a government to coordinate our work together to alleviate the suffering of the Palestinian people and the difficult humanitarian situation." And he underscored the importance of cooperation. Thank you for your support, Your Excellency, and indeed the support of the broader State of Palestine. We look forward to continuing our cooperation in 2022 to serve the people of Palestine. The humanitarian plan that we launched today seeks to complement rather than replace the efforts of the Palestinian authorities to increase the resilience of women, men, boys and girls living under occupation. We have hundreds of humanitarians from multiple organisations standing ready to implement this plan. It consists of 193 humanitarian projects tailored to help 1.6 million of the most vulnerable Palestinians to live in dignity despite the difficult circumstances in which they are caught. We have prioritised areas where the Palestinian ministries cannot operate freely, particularly the Gaza Strip, East Jerusalem, Area C, and the Israeli-controlled parts of Hebron known as H2 in the West Bank. With us today is Lynn Hastings, the humanitarian coordinator for the occupied Palestinian territory. Lynn, thank you for leading on humanitarian response in 2021. We would be grateful if you could present the plan for 2022.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks to all of those people who came together to prepare this plan. Unfortunately, the protracted political nature of this crisis means that, despite our very best efforts over many years, we have been unable to see an overall reduction in the humanitarian needs in Palestine. In the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, we're continuing to see increasing settlement expansion, demolitions of people's homes and livelihoods, evictions, and denial of basic rights and freedoms. In Gaza, we're entering the 15th year of the blockade, where people are unable to move freely, and again we're seeing increasing unemployment and increasing poverty overall. What we really need here is a political solution, and myself the special coordinator and others will be working to try and achieve a political horizon so we can bring an end to this conflict. In the meantime, however, we are targeting 1.5 million people of the most vulnerable in Palestine to provide them with support and to provide them with humanitarian assistance throughout 2022. To be successful, the United Nations needs funding for this humanitarian response plan together with its partners, but we also need political backing. Thank you. And over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Lynn. Indeed, our challenge is not only responding to the needs, but also reducing them. And to that end, we need to make sure that people's rights are respected. We are all set to implement the plan for 2022, but we will only be able to carry out projects that are funded sufficiently. We are happy to have with us today Diane Corner, the British Consul General, to speak on behalf of the donor community. Hello, Diane.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm talking to you from the British residence in East Jerusalem. This year, we saw the most serious spike in hostilities in Gaza since 2014, with tensions and conflict continuing to simmer in East Jerusalem and the West Bank. And as you have shared, 2021 has seen increased loss of life, increased settler violence, and increased settlement activity. The economy has contracted, unemployment has risen, especially amongst the youth, and women and girls face rising protection risks. It's a stark reminder that while COVID continues to cast its long shadow, it's the absence of a peace process that leaves too many Palestinians requiring humanitarian assistance. With stability and security fragile, the outlook for 2022 is sobering. The occupied Palestinian territories continues to rely on local civil society and international actors to respond to the growing humanitarian and protection needs, and to help both Palestinians and Palestinian refugees access basic services, secure their rights, and receive humanitarian and protection assistance. With this launch of the 2022 Humanitarian Response Plan, I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the dedication and commitment of all humanitarian actors in the OPTs. We as the UK remain committed to providing humanitarian assistance to help meet the needs of the most vulnerable, to help alleviate prolonged stress, and we stand ready to respond to future shocks. And it's back to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Diane, and of course, thank you to all our donor partners who have supported the efforts of the humanitarian community in Palestine. Now, I'd encourage again any of you watching live on social media to submit questions as comments during the live broadcast. Many of the speakers, myself included, are online ready to answer your questions. Now, today we have with us two Palestinians who have needed humanitarian assistance over the past year and kindly agreed to share their stories. I would like to start with Asma from the Gaza Strip. While Gaza is small, it is home to most people who need assistance in Palestine. Gaza's 2 million inhabitants are effectively unable to leave the Strip and are exposed to recurrent escalations of hostilities and challenged by the impacts of the internal political divide, a chronic power deficit, and shortages in specialised medical staff and equipment. This year in May, they were exposed to the worst escalation of hostilities since 2014, and some of the effects of that conflict are still with us. Over to you, Asma.
شكرا سارة. يوم 13/5 كان أول أيام عيد الفطر المبارك. اجتمعت أنا وعائلتي، حماتي وسلفاتي وأطفالنا جميعا لحتى نعايد على بعض. أثناء إعدادي للضيافة حدث انفجار كبير. شفت نار حمراء كبيرة، وبعد هيك حسيت ركام البيت كله بينزل على راسي، تزحلقت وقعت على الأرض. سمعت استغاثات الأطفال عنا، الصغار كانوا بيصرخوا إنه الحقونا انقذونا، بدنا حدا يساعدنا. بعد هيك سمعت ضجيج الناس تجمعت حوالين البيت. فيما بعد عرفت إنه تعرض بيتنا لقصف مباشر بدون سابق إنذار. بعد تمام ساعة ونص وأنا تحت الأنقاض انتقلت لمستشفى أبو يوسف النجار حتى أتلقى العلاج. بعد ما تلقيت خدمة العلاج حاولت أسأل عن زوجي وعن أطفالي. التقيت مع بناتي بعد 7 ساعات من القصف اللي تعرضنا له. كان جزء من العالم تم تحويلهم على مستشفيات أخرى غير المستشفى اللي احنا متواجدين فيها. بعد 8 أيام من قصف بيتنا انتهت الحرب على قطاع غزة. خلال أيام الحرب اللي كانت متواصلة التجأت لبيت بنت حماتي، استمرنا عندها لحد ما انتهت أيام الحرب، وبعد هيك استأجرت بيت. خلال هاي الفترة قدمت لنا جمعية عائشة الدعم النفسي إلي ولأطفالي، وعلمتني كيف أتعامل مع الأطفال بحيث إني أخفف عنهم من الضغط النفسي اللي كانوا متعرضين له. وقدموا لنا كمان المساعدات النقدية عشان نحل مشكلة الإيجار ونسدد الدفعات، وساعدونا كمان في العلاج، تقديم الخدمات العلاجية. أنا بطالب بإعادة سرعة إعادة إعمار قطاع غزة حتى نستقر في بيوتنا ويخف الضغط النفسي اللي إحنا بنتعرض له حاليا.
Thank you, Atma, for joining us today. It is inspiring to see how you, like so many others in Gaza, stay resilient and overcome hardships despite the difficult circumstances. Hopefully, a day where you no longer need our help is getting closer. But until then, I am proud of our humanitarian community working tirelessly to support people like you and your family. We greatly appreciate your willingness to share your testimony with us today. Now we have Sana Al-Adra joining us from Tuwani, an Area C community of the West Bank, which is surrounded by settlements and which is part of Mazafayata, an area designated by the Israeli authorities for military training, also known as the firing zone. There, Sana and her neighbours have endured tremendous pressure to leave. They have been exposed to violence, harassment by Israeli settlers, to military activities of the Israeli forces, and also to extremely limited access to basic services like pipe water and healthcare. Sana, thank you for agreeing to tell us about your challenges today.
شكرا سارة، تحتينا هاي الفرصة نعرف على قريتنا، قرية تواني تقع شرق يطا، وهي بوابة لمسافر يطا. عدد سكان هاي القرية 400 نسمة، محيطة بالمستوطنات، تفتقر للخدمات، وأهم هاي الخدمات الصحية. من خلال مؤسسة كير وجدت هاي العيادات المتنقلة. خلال هاي العيادات المتنقلة يوجد دكتور طب عام ودكتورة نسائية، وخلال هاي العيادة كان في دورات إسعاف أولي مكثفة اللي أنا استفدت منها وقدمت الخدمات لقريتي، وبنأمل إنه يستمر هذا المشروع، ولأن القرية بحاجة لهاي العيادة إنها تكون مفتوحة بسبب الاعتداءات المتكررة على القرية. من خلال هاي الدورة اللي استفدت منها أنا قدمت الخدمات لقريتي، وقدمت الخدمات الكثير من الاعتداءات المتكررة عليه، ونشكركم.
Thank you, Sana. It's great to see that the humanitarian assistance you received not only helped you personally, but also enabled you to become a humanitarian responder yourself. Your community's resilience in the face of efforts to push you out of where you live is inspiring, and we are proud to be able to support you. Now, the humanitarian community organises the delivery of its response through 6 main sectoral clusters: food security, protection, health, water, hygiene and sanitation, education, and shelter. Each of the clusters brings together UN entities and non-governmental organisations, both national and international, to work together, and we all work in coordination. This means that we have a system in place to ensure the utmost effectiveness of humanitarian response by any of the partners. With us today are representatives of the 6 clusters operating here in Palestine. Now, for the most part, people in need in Palestine require better food security, especially those who are unemployed and have limited economic means to support their families. Here, while food is typically available, many simply cannot afford sufficient nutritious food, and this has been exacerbated by the impact of the COVID pandemic, which has led to economic degradation across both Gaza and the West Bank, driving many Palestinians into deepening vulnerability and insecurity. As a result, the greater part of our humanitarian plan involves operations related to food security. So let us go first to two colleagues who jointly lead our food security programming. Dr. Azam Ayasa, Head of Programme at the Food and Agricultural Organization, and Samal Abdel Jabbar, the representative of the World Food Programme in Palestine. Let's start with you, Azam.
Thank you, Sarah. 2021 was not an easy year for the Palestinian people. In particular, the livelihoods and food security of thousands of Palestinian farmers, livestock holders, and fishers have been badly hit this year, not only due to the consequences of the protracted crisis, but also by shocks like the COVID-19 pandemic and the May violent conflict in Gaza Strip. For example, during the May conflict, a total of 7,000 dunams of greenhouses were fully or partially damaged. The total direct losses are estimated at $50 million, robbing thousands of female and male farmers not only of their sole source of livelihoods and food security, but also their production capacity for the coming year. Shocks like these call for time-critical joint action to safeguard the most vulnerable livelihoods while harnessing the potentials of Palestinian women and youth. FAO and its food security sector partners, consisting of 4 UN agencies and more than 40 NGOs, are appealing for international support, your support, to help Palestinian farmers build back better their production capacities and make their livelihoods more resilient. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Azam. Now over to you, Sama.
Thank you, Sarah, and hello to everyone here with us today. I'm here in the World Food Programme Country Office, one of 4 WFP locations throughout the West Bank and Gaza. 2 million Palestinians, almost 37% of the population, are estimated to be moderately to severely food insecure. In 2021, almost 2 out of 5 people are food insecure. Our HNO and HRP will give you the figure breakdown and details, but what's important is that in a year of unprecedented difficulty between COVID-19, economic degradation, a rise in violence, this situation has continued to worsen. Our food security sector consists of UN agencies and NGOs, and hand in hand with local institutions, the resilient people of Palestine, and the humanitarian, development, and donor communities, we are all working to ensure this basic right is always met and that nobody is left behind. This means direct food support, emergency food support where it's needed, of course, but it also means innovative modalities, cash-based support, resilience project, re-employment generation, and bolstering of local economy. It means the triple nexus approach applied in demystified way, bolstering food systems to make a real change, also prioritizing environmental factors. It means people and needs-based responses for safer today and a better tomorrow. I take this opportunity to renew our appeal for urgently needed funds to ensure response continues and scale-ups with these unprecedented needs. Back to you, Sarah, with thanks from WFP and the food security sector.
Thank you, Azam and Samer. Now, as you know, one of our roles in the humanitarian community is to provide protection to people whose rights are not sufficiently respected. And sadly, rights violations are systemic in the occupied Palestinian territory. And to a large extent, this is why so many people here need assistance. We will now hear from James Heeman, who heads the UN Human Rights Office and leads the humanitarian action related to protection. Over to you, James.
Thanks, Sarah, and hello everyone. Protection concerns continue to be at the heart of the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory. When we say protection, we mean efforts to stop or mitigate violations of international law. These violations drive the conflict, which is why we talk of a protection crisis in the occupied Palestinian territory. As we head into 2022, the main drivers of protection need remain in place. There are some key changes that others have mentioned. Clearly COVID, clearly the appalling aftermath of the May 21 hostilities between Israel and armed groups in Gaza, which saw well over 100 civilians killed and thousands injured, and traumatized large swathes of the population. In fact, mental health of Gazans is one of the biggest casualties of the escalation, and something that we in the protection cluster are focusing on. There was also a less widely reported but very high loss of life and injuries in the West Bank, including occupied East Jerusalem. And also 2021 unfortunately saw a dramatic increase in attacks on our civil society partners by all authorities. So what will the protection response be in 2022? Our surveys show a staggering 1.8 million Palestinians in need of protection. We'll have to prioritise those most in need, which is about 640,000, majority in Gaza, and we'll work over 7 principal areas. The first is mental health that I've mentioned, particularly of children and people in Gaza, things like psychosocial first aid, suicide prevention and so forth. The second is legal aid services for those affected by, at risk of violations of their human rights. The third is protective presence, which means the presence of people within communities to deter violations and lower friction with settlers and with Israeli forces. The fourth is monitoring and documenting the violations that I've mentioned. The fifth is child protection services, which includes things like life skills programs, legal assistance for children and so forth. The sixth is addressing gender-based violence, which is a big priority. This is health services for survivors, shelters for those who need to leave their homes, dignity kits for women. Finally, our Mine Action colleagues continue to respond to the real risk of unexploded bombs, including through disposal and messaging to risk populations, particularly for children. As you can see, it's a very full agenda and we count on your support. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James. Now, for decades, humanitarian needs in Palestine have been generated by a range of complex factors relating to the military occupation, the internal political divide, and the recurrent escalation of hostilities. But since 2020, these challenges have been further compounded by the COVID-19 pandemic. Of course, the health component of our humanitarian response plan has always been extremely important. But over the last 2 years, it has become absolutely critical. I therefore now invite Dr. Richard Pieperkorn, who heads the World Health Organization in Palestine and who also leads the health cluster. Rick, how has the global pandemic affected health operations in Palestine, and what are the priorities for next year?
Thank you, Sarah. It all starts with good health. Health is at the core of the humanitarian and development support. The WHO is proud to be co-lead of the health cluster together with the Ministry of Health and closely plan, coordinate and collaborate with the cluster partners, the national and international NGOs, the respective UN agency funds and programs operating as one UN. Now, the health cluster response in 2022 as part of the Humanitarian Response Plan will focus on 4 areas. 1. COVID-19, a further intensification of all activities related to prevention, treatment and care, and of course, vaccination. 2. To ensure that emergency and essential health services are available when and where needed. 3. To strengthen the preparedness and resilience of the health system to better cope with emergencies and epidemics. And 4. The right to health. Monitor and advocate for unhindered and equitable access to healthcare and protection of the right to health. The health cluster will target 1.2 million most vulnerable Palestinian children, women and men in the whole of the Gaza Strip and specific areas of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. The modest budget is estimated at $48.5 million US, for which I already would like to thank our esteemed donor partners. Health is at the core of the humanitarian response, and therefore the health cluster will work closely with the other clusters like food security, wash, protection and education to ensure a more holistic approach to health within the humanitarian interventions across the occupied Palestinian territory. We are looking forward to effective collaboration and implementation, improving for all Palestinians in need. But for now, I would like to wish all of you a happy and healthy New Year.
Thank you, Rick, to you and all of the health service providers. Now, let me just remind you once again, if you are watching us live on social media, please type in any questions that you may have, as many of us are online and ready to respond. Now let us turn to humanitarian action that provides hope to Palestinians: education. We are joined by two colleagues, Jason Lee, the country director of Save the Children, and Lucia Elmi, the representative of UNICEF, who co-lead the education cluster. Let's start with you, Jason, on recent developments affecting education in the occupied Palestinian territory, or the OPT.
In OPT, access to education continues to be compromised due to the protracted occupation, recurrent conflict, and of course, exacerbated by COVID-19. Education-related violations have continued in 2021, which include attacks on schools, including school demolitions, military use of schools, threats of attacks against school staff and students, and interference with access to education. In the Gaza Strip, 14 years of blockade, combined with multiple escalations of hostilities, have resulted in repeated damage and destruction to an already fragile education infrastructure. The acute humanitarian situation is exacerbated by increased poverty and protection concerns. In the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, checkpoints and the barrier impede access to education for children living in communities in Area C and East Jerusalem. In addition, this year witnessed an increased number of Israeli attacks on schools located in Area C and Hebron H2. All of the factors undermine the quality of education, generate protection concerns, and contribute to early school dropouts, exacerbated by COVID-19. Across the OPT, an estimated 579,173 Palestinians, the vast majority, 96% of them, are school-aged children, and more than half, 56% of them, are female. They will need humanitarian assistance to access quality, inclusive education in 2022. This number includes 13,398 children living with disabilities. Of all of these children, majority of them, 74%, live in the Gaza Strip, and 26% of them live in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. 16 education partners participated in developing the Education HRP for 2022, including 6 national NGOs. As a result, more than 467,000 children and their teachers will be reached through education services and support.
Thank you, Jason. I'm going to focus now on the life-saving action the education cluster is going to undertake in 2022 to reach nearly 500,000 children and their teachers in Gaza, in East Jerusalem and in Area C, so the most vulnerable areas. 16 members of the education cluster, including 6 Palestinian NGOs, will focus on the continuation of the rehabilitation of the schools in Gaza that were damaged during the escalation, the provision of material to make sure the schools are safe and protected from COVID-19, work with children with disability to be able to access quality education, and also the provision of mental health and psychosocial support. This is something that will continue to be a need, it's something that will continue to be life-saving for the generation to come. The education cluster also will continue to focus on the protection of children on their way to school, to prevent and end grave violations, and finally also to make sure that learning materials is available to the most vulnerable communities, particularly girls. So thank you, and over to Sarah.
Thank you both. Lucia, UNICEF also leads on the humanitarian response related to water, sanitation and hygiene, which we refer to by the acronym WASH. A few days ago, you visited a water plant in Gaza and sent us a short video from there. Let's watch it.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, dear colleagues. It's an honor today to represent the WASH cluster and its partners for the launch of the Humanitarian Response Plan for 2022. The WASH cluster is aiming at reaching more than 900,000 people in Gaza, in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and particularly in the most vulnerable areas. In Gaza, we will be continuing to support the recovery and the rehabilitation of the most pressing humanitarian needs in the wake of the escalation of last year, 2021, to increase access to water, but also the quality of the services. In the West Bank, we'll continue to work on quality, on the resilience of the communities, and of access at the household level, but also at the community level, including schools and health centers. The COVID-19 pandemic is still a major challenge, so the water and sanitation aspect will continue to be an important component of the response, while at the same time the WASH clusters is already starting to tackle the effects of climate change and looking also at the short-term, medium-term and long-term implication of the consequences of climate change, particularly on the most vulnerable communities in Palestine. We are very proud to have the joint efforts of 33 partners. They are members of the WASH clusters, including 15 Palestinian NGOs, and also we would like to commend the effort to link the humanitarian intervention to the development efforts and making sure that the two goes hand in hand in strengthening that nexus between the short-term response and addressing the structural issues and looking at system strengthening in the long run. So thank you Sarah, thank you dear colleagues, and over to you.
Thank you once again, Lucia. Indeed, whenever water infrastructure is damaged in conflict or demolitions by the Israeli authorities, this immediately affects a large number of people whose need for support increases. But we regularly need to provide assistance also following devastation or demolitions that renders people homeless, which brings us to shelter interventions. Let me welcome Caroline Ort, Country Director of the Norwegian Refugee Council, who leads the shelter cluster, to present this important element of the plan. Over to you, Caroline.
Thank you, Sarah, and greetings from the NRC office in the heart of East Jerusalem. Across the occupied Palestinian territory, shelter needs are on the rise. An estimated 943,000 Palestinians, the vast majority in Gaza, need shelter assistance in 2022 to maintain a minimum level of protection and dignity. Gaza is one of the most densely populated areas in the world, where more than 2 million Palestinians live in a narrow 365 square kilometer strip of land. Gaza suffers from a chronic housing shortage of 120,000 units, with an annual average of 14,000 housing units needed to meet natural population growth. The escalation of May 2021 between Palestinian armed factions in Gaza and Israel aggravated Gaza's chronic shelter, infrastructure and energy deficits. While the shelter cluster will rehabilitate damaged homes, there remain unmet needs for the reconstruction of completely destroyed structures. In the West Bank, some 73,000 Palestinians need shelter assistance, specifically Area C, East Jerusalem and the H2 area of Hebron City. The restrictive and discriminatory planning and zoning regime applied by Israel in Area C and East Jerusalem makes it virtually impossible for Palestinians to obtain building permits, thus impeding the development of adequate housing and infrastructure. In Area C alone, there are over 15,500 demolition orders pending against Palestinian structures. The number of demolitions in 2021 will likely eclipse all previous years, apart from 2016. The resulting housing deficit, alongside the risk of demolition, is a significant push factor for residents of Area C and East Jerusalem to relocate elsewhere in the West Bank. Israeli authorities continue to impose physical and administrative measures that restrict humanitarian programs, including constraints on the delivery of materials needed and limitations on the implementation of projects that involve building, expanding or rehabilitating infrastructure. More than a quarter of destroyed structures in 2021 were donor funded. Finally, the COVID-19 pandemic continues to add extra strain to shelter needs, generating extra pressure for families living in substandard shelters. Back to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Caroline. And as we said before, this territory desperately needs long-term political solutions. But until then, to respond to humanitarian needs, we require funding. Unfortunately, in recent years, humanitarian operations in the occupied Palestinian territory have been underfunded. A major service provider in the occupied Palestinian territory is the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East, more commonly known as UNRWA. This agency's operations are at risk of being jeopardized as a result of underfunding. Our needs assessment of 2020 is predicated upon the agency continuing large-scale operations beyond what is included in the Humanitarian Response Plan. With us now is Thomas White, the Director of UNRWA Operations in Gaza. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I'm joining you from Beach Camp in Gaza. Life for refugees in Beach Camp, in fact for Gazans across the Strip, is very tough. Any prospects that the situation would improve in 2021 were dashed by the May conflict. As a result of the conflict, we've seen a hugely negative impact upon the economy. Unemployment rates are now risen above 50%, much closer to 70% for young people, and poverty rates for many communities are touching 80%. We also saw damage to the already fragile infrastructure of the Gaza and, most significantly, damage and destruction of tens of thousands of housing units in Gaza. Of particular concern is the impact upon people. Years of crippling poverty and its associated social issues, plus dealing with the trauma of the war in May, has created significant mental health crisis here in Gaza. About half of the children of Gaza require some sort of mental health support. As UNRWA, alongside our human development programming, we have a portfolio of humanitarian programming designed to support the refugee communities of Gaza, with a focus upon 8 out of 10 families being able to put bread on the table through a combination of cash for work, food and multi-purpose cash, an extensive program to help repair the infrastructure and the housing stock of Gaza, and finally a very focused program on the mental health of young people within the Gaza Strip. To the international community, to our funding partners, I really urge you to continue your support to the humanitarian programs of UNRWA, the UN agencies, and importantly the NGOs and national NGOs that are supporting the people of Palestine. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Tom. As I said before, our plan is based on the assumption that UNRWA will continue to provide critical essential services to Palestine refugees in both Gaza and the West Bank. It is therefore vital that UNRWA continues to be appropriately funded and resourced. I would like to thank those of you who have submitted comments and questions on social media during the broadcast so far. We have 2 more speakers to go, and this is the last reminder that some of today's speakers stand ready to respond to questions submitted through social media. So if you have any questions, please do type them in before we conclude this launch. I would like to give the floor now to Sama Dawoodi from the Palestinian NGO Network, an important partner in the Humanitarian Response Plan. Palestinian NGOs, community-based organisations, are the front line of aid delivery, but their ability to deliver assistance has become increasingly difficult. Over to you, Sama.
Thank you, Sarah. Very glad to be here from the city of Ramallah, and a warm welcome to all the participants in the public launch of the Humanitarian Response Plan 2022. Looking back at 2021, Palestinian civil society would like to share the following lessons learned. First, in the OPT, we have a political man-made crisis, a human rights crisis, a protection crisis that cannot be resolved through humanitarian instruments. The HRP is an important instrument to serve Palestinian vulnerable communities, but will not solve the problem here. Second, Palestinians lack protection, are in growing need of protection presence, considering the irreversible processes after many years living under occupation. Third, humanitarian actors, especially the Palestinian civil society, whom are the frontline defenders, are also in dire need of protection themselves, and we need to ensure and safeguard humanitarian aid. Fourth, member states, local governments, the international community, and the Israeli occupying government need to uphold their responsibility and obligations in protecting humanitarian principles and human rights. Fifth, 4 wars waged against the Gaza Strip, dating 2008, 2012, 2014, and 2021. An ongoing blockade makes the lives of Palestinians very difficult, with lots of humanitarian need to be addressed, and very little chance of development. In fact, much de-development. The status quo needs to be changed, and only by lifting the blockade can we make a true difference collectively. Sixth, COVID-19 has made it very difficult for us in the OPT, especially for Palestinian civil society. Limited aid, limited funding, most of the funding directed to UN agencies and NGOs, much movement restrictions and procurement heavy processes has made localization very difficult. We need to address the gaps collectively and ensure that no one is truly left behind. Allow me to give also a quick glimpse on the most critical operational risks faced by humanitarian actors, especially Palestinian NGOs. In the Gaza Strip, we continue to deal with the inability to provide services freely due to the blockade, due to the Palestinian divide as well, deterioration of the situation in energy, wash, health, high unemployment, and continuous obstruction rather than facilitation of humanitarian assistance. In the West Bank, especially in Area C, ongoing confiscation of aid, demolitions of funded and unfunded humanitarian structures, massive forcible transfer, increased settler violence, expansion of settlements, alongside a long list of discriminatory policies and practices committed against Palestinian population. In East Jerusalem, also shrinking space, ongoing demolitions, lack of permits available, and inability to provide humanitarian aid as well. Finally, our priorities in 2022 are the following. Member states and donors need to uphold humanitarian principles. Second, we need to push back collectively against shrinking space. Third, donors need to walk the talk in terms of the Grand Bargain and World Humanitarian Summit. In 2021, only 5% was allocated through Palestinian civil society organization. That is well far behind from the 25% committed before. This will lead to better localization if we get to 25%, which was committed by everyone. It will lead to more empowerment and better inclusion. Last but not least, strong will to implement the triple nexus and the protection of the right of return, right of self-determination, ending occupation, and promoting equal rights. Only then can we have life with dignity. Together, with political support, can we ensure respect and compliance of international law and international humanitarian law. Back to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Samer. We're looking forward to working with you more in 2022. Now, last but not least, we have Joseph Kelly, who heads the Association of International Development Agencies, more commonly known as IDA. Joseph, thank you for joining us.
Many thanks, Sarah, and it's great to be with you here today. On behalf of our members, we'd like to thank all the many different actors who were involved in the process of the HRP this year. First and foremost, we'd like to thank UNRWA and the humanitarian community overall for piloting and driving this process. NGOs are proud to be part of a process where we're invited to contribute with our unique perspectives, together with our national NGO counterparts, much of which emanate from within the communities where we work. The NGO community takes pride in the perspective we are able to bring into this process, and we value the platform that we're given to discuss, to bring new ideas, and advocate for creative and transforming solutions. NGOs are often at the front lines of humanitarian response throughout the OPT, covering all areas, including those that are hardest to reach. Sustained funding is critical and crucial for our efforts to reach the communities most in need of humanitarian assistance. IDA sees the HRP as a powerful tool to challenge the shrinking humanitarian space here in Palestine. While the challenges of the space are at times daunting, we remain committed to the core principles in defending the values of civic engagement and discourse as a means to the right of self-determination. IDA values its partnership with Palestinian NGOs and will continue to do so. IDA also understands that shrinking civic space targets all human rights and humanitarian actors in the OPT, including NGOs. In conclusion, I'd like to applaud the efforts of our HRP in supporting the many initiatives that will in turn support communities across Palestine in realizing many of their goals and ambitions for better lives, dignity, and peace. Many thanks.
Thank you, Joseph, our last speaker. With this, we will conclude today's launch of the 2022 Humanitarian Response Plan for the occupied Palestinian territory. This plan not only needs to be sufficiently funded, it must also be complemented by efforts to fight back against attacks that delegitimize humanitarian actors, and by political engagement to address the rights violations that lie at the heart of the crisis here. So I would now like to thank again those who have attended today's launch. Humanitarian Coordinator Lynn Hastings, the donor community, colleagues from the humanitarian community, Palestinians who have benefited from humanitarian action and shared their stories with us today, and representatives of UNRWA, PINGO and IDA. I would also like to reiterate my thanks to His Excellency Dr. Ahmed Majlani, the Minister of Social Development representing the State of Palestine, for support that he has given to the Humanitarian Response Plan. And finally, of course, special thanks to you who have joined us today on social media and to those who have submitted comments and questions. For more information on the Humanitarian Response Plan, please go to our website, ochaopt.org. As we welcome the new year, it is my wish for 2022 that our humanitarian plan can be fully implemented and that Palestinian rights are protected and upheld and that people's needs are met across the board. We are here to make sure that Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territory can live with dignity. Thank you all for being with us today and for joining us in solidarity with the people of Palestine. Goodbye.